You know, one of the most frustrating things in modern day gaming now are the microtransactions that seem to even follow full price, now $70 games. And I'll admit I am getting kind of tired of it. So I thought today I would try something new and I'd go to a place where we don't have to deal with microtransactions or artificial grinding. None of that. We just download games and play them. And for that, I'm going to have to go to my phone. That's right. Today, we're checking out Apple Arcade and see if maybe I've been off the mark on this one for a couple of years. Most people are unaware just how strong Apple is in the gaming market. Recently, Microsoft posted up numbers that put things into perspective in the mobile space, with Apple making up 16% of the marketplace with a total revenue of $14.8 billion in 2022. This puts their gaming revenue billions of dollars above Nintendo in the same year and closely behind Microsoft. The craziest part about this, by the way, is Apple is what's known as a passive participant, since they don't actively develop and release games at all. This rise in revenue has been something that's been a trend for more than a decade, so it's not surprising that in 2019, Apple moved to create their own subscription service for their ecosystem called Apple Arcade. Currently, this service is priced at $6.99, and I'm sure that's a complete accident per month, and it comes with one big stipulation from Apple: no microtransactions. That's right, the stigma around mobile games being filled with all these in-app purchases is not the case in Apple Arcade. Here, you subscribe to their subscription service and you just get the games and you play them. Consoles could learn a thing or two from phones, huh? So to get started, I will need hardware to play these Apple Arcade games, and since it's Apple, we need to go with their proprietary devices and software. So I decided to pick up the Apple TV 4K, mostly because it would be the cheapest option if you don't have any Apple hardware already, and I thought it'd be fun to see how it would perform in some of these more graphically intensive games that Apple has available in their service. This model is the third generation 4K TV, seems to range anywhere between $150 to $200. It is Wi-Fi enabled, however, I opted to just plug it into Ethernet to get the best possible connection when downloading games. On the back, it has a standard power port, so fortunately no big power supply box, nothing like that, Ethernet, and an HDMI 2.1 port. This is capable of 4K playback with HDR. Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5 also comes built in. You do get this Bluetooth remote, and this is a nice metal finish to it. It feels like a premium accessory. It has all the buttons you would expect for a remote, along with a microphone button on the side, so you can search for shows with your voice. I do like the click pad. Since it's also a trackpad, it lets you swipe your thumb left, right, up, and down to select things on the menu. And finally, on the bottom, there's a USB-C port for charging. Thank you, Apple. And you know, I had to take a look inside, so after cracking open the bottom and removing the Torx screws, I was able to get a look at the A15 Bionic chip powering the TV. This is a 64-bit ARM-based chipset with a 6-core CPU, 5-core GPU, and it was last used in the iPhone 14 before giving way to the A16 chip. The whole thing is passively cooled, and that should go over well, I figure, for streaming shows since it'll be silent. I did notice, however, this thing got really hot to the touch during long play sessions, especially in some of the more intensive games. I don't think it'll be an issue or anything, but active cooling with a small fan probably wouldn't be a bad idea if we ever get one of these with a new M chip installed. As for a controller, since we can't use the remote to play these games, I decided to go with just the Xbox Series Bluetooth controller. I was able to sync it up very quickly, and it'll just turn right on with the Apple TV 4K when I hold down the Xbox button on the front, so it all works together pretty well. And I did notice that in games, they'll even change some of the icons, whether it's confirm or cancel, or if the triggers have to be used for something like dodge, in the menus with the UI, the whole deal. So they at least have it set up to expect an Xbox controller, but it also appears that things like the PlayStation controller, Nintendo Switch controller, all of those should be supported as well. After turning on the Apple TV and signing in, it said I had 3 months of Apple Arcade. It came packaged in with the TV, but I've seen a lot of people online mention just getting a free month here and there for Arcade, so I would recommend checking just to see if you have a free trial sitting around, but opening up the app, I gotta say, not a fan of the layout. It's fine in the sense that it shows you different games and what's popular, but it immediately gives off the mobile phone vibe with what's on that front page. Everything is broken up into categories as you scroll down, but the stuff at the front are things like Temple Run, Cut the Rope. These are fine games for killing time on your phone, but I figure putting the more unique games at the top would at least work to differentiate this service, Apple Arcade, from just the standard App Store. Now, I did spot Sonic and NBA 2K24 pretty quickly, but the rest I ended up browsing the whole catalog and adding them to the queue for download, which I realized going through every game on here would take a long time, so I picked a few to go over here in this video that stood out to me. Even with these games, though, don't take it as a full review, just more of my initial impressions after about an hour or two, since I was jumping around quite a bit the first couple of days. The first game I started up was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splintered Fate. This is definitely a case where the licensing for the game caught my interest, since it's a Turtles game. And oh yeah, that's right, I forgot to mention, somehow Apple figured out game achievements before Nintendo, and this game has 96 of them. Imagine someone bragging to you about their platinum trophy after you get 96 out of 96 achievements in an Apple Arcade game. Anyway, you immediately pick which turtle you want to play as. It throws you into a tutorial stage, showing you the controls. Pretty standard. It's an isometric beat 'em up, but once the tutorial ends and the game starts, I was pleasantly surprised on this one. It's a roguelike action game, similar to something like Hades. You clear different rooms using combinations of light and heavy attacks along with gadgets that you collect. You can dodge incoming attacks, and at times, you'll really need to time these since the screen can get pretty full of enemies. Also, the whole thing is voice acted, and it's actually not bad.
I got too cocky. Let my guard down. And then Shredder.
Stop. Do not punish yourself, Leonardo. I too was caught by surprise. It appears Orokusaki has new tricks at his disposal.
How do we find you?
I do not know.
We're gonna come get you, Sensei, wherever you are. Nothing's getting in our way.
We won't let you down, Father.
I have never doubted your courage nor your perseverance, my sons. And there may be ways I can aid you in this task.
I found this strange coin, Sensei. I thought you would know what to do with it.
Yes, I recognize this, an aspect of dark magic.
Eventually, you'll come to rooms with bosses, and some are pretty fun cameos from the franchise, and when you eventually die, you go back to the Turtles' lair where you can apply permanent upgrades, and looking through the number of things to improve and add to your Turtles, this seems like a pretty lengthy game, and there's even online multiplayer where you set up a room and make some runs with friends. This is a pretty strong start for my adventure into Apple Arcade, and I give this one an easy recommendation. Next up, we have Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis. Yeah, it sounded weird to me too, but I figured this would be sort of their take on Mario Tennis with Nickelodeon characters, and I was half right. The gameplay itself, not very precise. Shots can be pretty weird to control. This game doesn't lock you into a shot before you start charging up, so you end up moving just a little bit each time with your character, and the whole thing just feels off. It's hard to describe, but if you get a chance to play it, you'll know what I'm talking about here. The characters are at least represented well, minus the creative decision to give Michelangelo dead eyes for some reason. And there's a lot to do in terms of unlocking items and customizing your characters, so that carrot on a stick exists here. But for me, this isn't a high mark, and I would probably skip it. Okay, Sonic Dream Team. This is the game that recently released into the service that finally pushed me over the edge to make this video. Sonic Dream is a 3D Sonic game that Sega announced would be exclusive to Apple Arcade, and I'm sure this wasn't the most popular decision with Sonic fans since the game actually looked pretty good. You get hit with a great animated opening for the game, and then you pick your character between Sonic, Amy, Tails, Knuckles, this one. I'm going to start with the obvious analysis first. If you like 3D Sonic, guess what? you're probably going to like this game. It's not a super watered down version to fit on a phone. You do have large open areas to run around and boost in. The goal, it's still the same. Find a solid path to the end of the level, collecting rings and keys along the way. And visually speaking, the game is one of the better looking titles that I checked out, as bright colors, minimal aliasing around the 3D models, and it kept pace pretty well with performance. I only really noticed frame drops when a lot of mayhem was happening on screen. On stronger hardware like a newer iPhone or an iPad, that wouldn't really be an issue, I assume. And the rail grinding being a heavy focus would look really cool in motion speeding around at higher frame rates. And hey, I'll give it this. I certainly noticed less pop-in than with Sonic Frontiers. While I only really played as Sonic and Amy, there were spots that said I needed to play as Knuckles to reach. So I could see going through each level multiple times being a theme, and each level, it's pretty short, with some being completed in less than a minute. So this wouldn't be a bad game to fire up on an iPhone if you're just trying to kill time for a few minutes here and there. Sonic Dream Team, this one gets a thumbs up from me. Highly recommend it. Next, we have a game called World of Demons from Platinum Games. Yeah, that's right. They developed a title exclusively for the service, and it's actually pretty awesome. It's an action game, as you expect from Platinum Games, but this is taking a lot of inspiration from Okami with the art style, and it looks super unique in motion. The idea here is pretty simple. You explore set maps with encounters and string together combos with light and heavy attacks, but you mix in these elemental attacks from different monsters you collect along the way. These come in the forms of cards you find on the battlefield or after defeating big bosses and befriend them. Some are temporary or one-time summons, while others are permanent and just need a cooldown to complete between attacks. The combat itself ends up being extremely fluid. When you get the hang of it, throwing together light attacks, then using a water summon to launch an enemy up in the air, and finish with a heavy attack to spike them down into the ground, extremely satisfying stuff. There are different characters to unlock with varying stats, and the monsters can be leveled up as you find materials. This is another game where the Apple TV 4K held up for the most part, but when a bunch of enemies got on screen, you could feel some slowdown, which isn't great for a fast-paced action game like this. Still, it's a fun outing for Platinum Games that's just hidden away in Apple Arcade, and it's an easy recommendation. Okay, NBA 2K24. This was more a request by a certain individual named RGT from general curiosity as to what exactly this game plays like, and I think most of us figure these mobile sports games are going to be designed as limited experiences, and while I'm not super familiar with NBA 2K, this looks much closer to the full version on consoles. Obviously, visuals here won't be able to stand up to the console versions, but it plays like a full-fledged NBA title with career mode, virtual currency, and all the gameplay beats I would expect. The shot meter uses a button press or the right stick, and it's about timing your release, which turns out I'm not very good at. The very least I can do here, though, is show you this isn't some weird mobile version of NBA 2K, and seems to be a decent experience that probably won't replace the full version for you, but could get you by if you were stuck maybe with your iPhone out for a bit. Next up, I have to check out the Resident skateboarding game on the platform, which comes up here as Skate City. It's a 2D skateboarding game going from left to right, where you skate a set path doing flip tricks, manuals, and grinding rails in the background or the foreground. The tricks are done using the left stick for your standard ollies, kick flips. The right stick covers any nollie variations you might want to do. This is another game that falls under the quick play category since a run can take less than a minute in some cases. There are some objectives where you race another person, you run from cops, you knock over soda cans, or just hit a high score. It sort of reminds me of that old Tony Hawk game on the Game Boy Color, and I had a lot of fun with that simplistic approach back then, and found myself having fun here all the same. You get money from completing objectives, and there is an entire skate shop for customizing your look, board, skills, tricks. There's a lot to earn as you play, and for any skateboarding fan, I'd say it's a solid recommendation. I decided to check out the simulation racing game on the service because, well, mostly I wanted to see how the Apple TV would hold up with something like Gear Club, which has been known on mobile for a while, falling in line with a series like Gran Turismo, where they attempt a more realistic approach, and it looks good enough on the Apple TV, but this is a game I noticed probably the most slowdown just across the board here with all the titles I checked out, and it had the Apple TV jumping in temperature. This is one where it is getting pretty toasty on top. It's probably one I would play on newer hardware. Even though it is playable here, it's not a great experience. Frame rate is all over the place, and for a racing game, you'd like it to be closer to 60 frames per second if you could get it there. Otherwise, you do have name brands here with legit high-end cars to race around and upgrade. Just maybe do it on a nice iPad or iPhone with a controller. Hey, look, we have a Castlevania game. This one's called Grimoire of Souls, and there's a weird story here with this one that I think helps to explain some of the strange stuff here. This was a mobile game that released back in 2019 exclusively in Canada as a standard phone game, complete with the gacha summoning elements, microtransactions, the whole deal. It was eventually shut down, and then about a year later, Apple revived it, and they just entered it into their subscription service without the microtransactions. Okay, now with all of that covered, the game itself is what you expect from a 2D Castlevania game. You make your way through each level, wiping out all kinds of different enemies. You have weapons to choose from, of course. You have different characters, like I had Alucard and Simon, so I was either hitting them with the swords or having a whip fly all over the place. There are others I haven't unlocked yet, but that's where things get kind of weird. So this game, clearly designed to take advantage of microtransactions. It's actually noticeable still just by the way the game is set up. There are multiple types of currency, tickets, daily login bonuses, upgrade paths for every single weapon and character. There are equipment summons through gems, and every time you turn around, there's something else to equip and improve. It ends up being a very convoluted system that could have people just feeling overwhelmed with options, and I can't really blame them here. There is at least an auto-equip button to give you the best possible loadout, so just press that, I guess. The art style also not really doing it for me, specifically with the sprites. It just looks kind of like a cheap Flash game at times, but if you can get over all of that, it's actually a decent enough Castlevania game. I mean, there's a lot of lore here to appreciate, some guest characters that I'm sure longtime fans will get a kick out of, and it controls fine, but it's probably not a game I'll personally be sticking with. Next up, we have Cipher 007, and I'll admit, I wasn't expecting to find a new 007 game, let alone a top-down isometric one, but here we are. This Bond game is much more of a stealth game compared to past entries, which were much more about action, explosions, cool car chases. Okay, I'm joking since this game approaches stealth really well, at least. As Bond, you do have different gadgets you can use, and while you are able to break out guns blazing, it's not really recommended. It sort of gives me some old school Metal Gear vibes where you're at the mercy of a static camera crouching around corners and causing distractions to get by. You are able to upgrade your weapons and gadgets as you collect intel, giving you reason to spend extra time looking around each level, and we haven't had a new James Bond game in over 10 years now, and I can confidently recommend Cipher 007 over that one. Finally, I saved the best for last. Fantasian is a game I've been looking at for a long time now, and it's almost sold me on Apple Arcade just by itself in the past. This is a traditional turn-based RPG that was co-developed and published by Mistwalker with both Hironobu Sakaguchi and Nobuo Uematsu, the original creators of the Final Fantasy series. I really enjoyed what Mistwalker was putting out during the Xbox 360 days with Blue Dragon, Lost Odyssey, and Fantasian feels very much like an old-school classic RPG from the late PS2, early Xbox 360 days. You can definitely see influences from Lost Odyssey, the way these different memories are presented in flashbacks, and Final Fantasy, clearly, with the different character designs. The thing that is so striking about this game are the backgrounds. In development, it was decided that to mimic the pre-rendered backgrounds from the PS1 days, dioramas would be used. So they just made them, and then using photogrammetry, made some absolutely beautiful backdrops. It's an extremely creative idea that really sets this game apart from current RPGs. The combat, from what I've experienced so far after a few hours, it's been fairly standard. They do have some skills letting you attack rows of enemies along with defensive moves like a barrier, and that had to be used just right with the first boss, so I'm already seeing some strategy in play here, and it certainly has a lot to set into motion with the story early on, and the one thing that really feels like is missing here is the voice acting, as it just feels like a major contrast compared to some of the higher quality, detailed visuals for the backgrounds that are just so interesting to look at, and then it's just quiet text boxes that go by. That said, out of all the games I played so far, this is the one I'm most drawn to continuing, and based on the estimated playtime being upwards of 60 plus hours, and there's a part 2 coming in the future, it seems like a good time to get started. But looking back at my time with Apple Arcade, it was mostly positive with just a few issues that I'll go over now. So for one, not every game seems to have a quit option to get back to the main menu. So I found myself having to use the Apple remote to go home rather than just stick with that Xbox controller. This could probably be fixed with remapping buttons, but it feels like something that should just already be there by default, as in a button on the Xbox controller is just assigned with the home button. Also, adding friends was a whole thing where you need to get their email address, then go through iMessage or something, and it ended up being a process that even Reggie pushing friend codes during interviews would be laughing at. Finally, while Apple doesn't allow microtransactions in games for the service, some of these games are just fundamentally designed with login bonuses, gotcha elements, multiple currencies, and it sticks out. And after all of this, I will admit, I was wrong about Apple Arcade. I kind of glossed over it, thinking that, yeah, it's just those mobile games that I've seen many, many times at the top of the App Store or even Android Play Store charts. But I'll admit, there are some very unique and creative ideas thrown in here with some intellectual properties that many of us are already familiar with. And because these appear to be games that Apple has worked to fund specifically for Apple Arcade, I have to give them some credit. A lot of these games probably wouldn't exist without Apple Arcade existing at all. So yeah, I don't know if I would recommend going out and buying a MacBook Pro for like $1,000 some odd dollars, or putting money into an Apple or Mac Mini or anything there. But if you already have any of these devices, even like an iPhone, or maybe you're out looking for a streaming stick or a streaming box and you see the Apple TV 4K in front of you, yeah, it might be worth picking up the dive into Apple Arcade, as of course Apple continues to update it, but also with the library that's there, it's actually pretty fun. But let me know what you guys think about Apple Arcade down below, especially if you're someone who's been maybe playing it for a while now, or maybe you just jumped into it and you wanted to give me some of your initial thoughts. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.